Welcome everybody. This is a special session of the System Club, which we're making available to everybody because I think it's going to be of importance and interest to everyone. People that were at my 25th anniversary of being in the internet business know that we had a meeting in Chicago and I invited a lot of people to come and speak, and I was very happy that a lot of people were able to come out and talk. And one of the people I really wanted to come and talk about her experiences was Sandy Rosenthal. And a lot of our internet marketing colleagues don't know Sandy or Sandy's work, but some of our club members are a little aware of it. But I always say that Sandy's easily one of my best clients ever in terms of taking the most out of what I've offered. And now Sandy's work is not in the profit-making realm, though I have no doubt if she wanted to go into that realm, she would do extremely well as well. But what she decided to do in 2005 was apply her energy to bringing justice to New Orleans. People may remember that there was horrific, terrible flooding. Over 1,300 people killed instantly. I'm sure many more thousands died within weeks as a result. I'm trying to remember, $100 billion with a B dollars worth of property damage. 100,000 people or more homeless. I don't know how many. I mean, the whole city was basically essentially destroyed. And the story we were being told was that, oh, well, this was an act of God, and, you know, nobody could have foreseen it, and what a shock, and Mother Nature did this to us, and that didn't really ring true. And Sandy started to research and discovered that, in fact, over time, because a lot of research was involved, that it wasn't an act of nature, it was an act of incompetence, poor engineering, callous disregard for humanity. And now, why is this important? Why is it? Well, it's important to get the truth out. It was certainly important to everybody in New Orleans. But you know what? It was whether they knew it or not, it was important to everybody in the country. Because if we have people at the top that do not take responsibility for what they're supposed to be doing, it's a problem for all of us. Anyway, Sandy worked for years and years and years against a very formidable foe, which is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So big that if you have a pie chart of the federal government budget, you'll actually see their little slice. I mean, they throw a lot of money around. They've been a problem for a long time. Even President Eisenhower complained about how difficult it was to manage and deal with them. And they were not happy to have their misdeeds exposed, and they and their various agents put a lot of pressure on Sandy through various means. But in the long run, the truth prevailed, thanks to Sandy and Levees.org. So we're going to talk with her about a very important subject, which is leadership in times of crisis. But before we get to that, I want to talk about hardship in general. I know a lot of people are going through hardships. I just talked with a friend of mine, owned a restaurant for 15 years. It's closed. The same morning before the city closed it, her bank zeroed her credit line. So she's not going to make it. You know, this beautiful business that she spent 15 years nurturing, that employed 45 people, that was her livelihood, is gone. And you can repeat this story all over America, all over Europe too. It is a financial cataclysm and a very personal cataclysm, not just for the business owners, but for their employees too. So people in New Orleans have a little bit of a perspective on what it means to be wiped out. So let's remember, before we start to talk about leadership in a time of crisis, let's talk about a crisis, Sandy. And with that very long introduction, let's remind people what New Orleans went through, because people may have forgotten or may not have ever been aware of the details. So let's start there with what New Orleanians faced post-storm, post-flood.
So this is my turn.
This is, sorry, my hot air has finally run out. Yes, it's a big warm-up to I'm not saying that what's going on now is not a hardship, because obviously for many people is a cataclysmic hardship. But we have to put things in perspective. Let's talk about what New Orleans went through.
Certainly. New Orleanians only had about, I would say, not more than 48 hours notice before we got word that a hurricane was headed toward our city. Most people aren't aware that the storm, very last minute, changed course, surprised everybody, surprised all the models. We couldn't believe it. So we had to board up our home. Me and the rest of the city had to board up our home and get out of town in just 36 hours. And keeping in mind that 100,000 people didn't have access to credit cards, a car, road experience, or family to visit. I was one of the lucky ones. I was able to get out of town. So we watched from afar, and one of the things that made it a little easier for me is I packed for 3 weeks. Most people packed for just 2 days. My overzealous, at the time it seemed overzealous, preparation actually served me extremely well during a time of crisis. So I was sitting pretty with my checkbook and my paperwork and clothes for 3 weeks. I even bought my tennis gear, which is important. In a strange way, it's very important. And so I was watching. So I watched from afar as the disaster unfolded, and from my relative position of being protected. And then I watched from afar the government's botched response. And so here I am now feeling very much a deja vu. But getting back to that time, 100,000 people were trapped in the city. 1 million people's lives turned literally upside down. Nobody came out of that disaster without being terribly affected. The trauma, some people are still in trauma. I myself was in trauma. We were all in a certain type of trauma. 80% of the city was flooded. If anyone has ever heard that only the poor neighborhoods flooded, that is not true. The levee breach event and the flood event was it did not select who would be flooded. It was an equal opportunity flooder, we like to call it. Mm-hmm. So that, in a nutshell, is what happened to us. Some neighborhoods still are only 50% rebuilt, some not even that much. The French Quarter is up and running. Yes, it is. And since then, the Army Corps has rebuilt the levees better. But that's another story as well.
So people lost their homes. This is we got to remember this. They had no home, so all their stuff gone. If somebody had a business in New Orleans, it was gone.
And not just their home, it's their home, their business, their church, their post office, their restaurants, their gym, everything.
Their neighbors,
everything, all at once in a few hours.
So I'm not minimizing what people are going through, but when I hear people moaning that, well, gee, I can't go out and get a drink, give me a break, guys. You've got a roof over your head, you've got food, there are neighbors about. Let's put things in perspective. And the city remained flooded for weeks.
It took about a month to dewater the city completely. Yes, the city was in water for weeks, definitely.
And some neighborhoods, are at different elevations. I'm trying to remember the name of the neighborhood, but it was under 15 feet of water.
That's the Broadmoor neighborhood.
Broadmoor, exactly. Yeah.
Not far from me, actually.
Yeah.
I could easily walk there. And meanwhile, I'm 6 feet above sea level. So it's interesting how the neighborhoods were very different heights in a small area. Meanwhile, we didn't know. We weren't really aware of this. We had no reason to.
And I remember weird details, like the weight of the water broke the sewer and water lines. Mm-hmm. So not only did people have to leave for an extended period, when they came back, they not only came back to destroyed homes, many people, but they came back to a destroyed infrastructure.
That's correct.
Lights, traffic lights didn't work, water didn't work, electricity wasn't working, gas wasn't working. I mean, so what's happening now is terrible, but we need some perspective. We need. So that's always a good place, I think, to start. Now, the one thing that is a little different is people from New Orleans could, at least if they had the means, could go somewhere else. There's really no place anybody can go to escape this. I mean, if I just heard a report that Thunder Bay, which is up in Ontario, which is the most remote white bread place you can imagine. Nobody's traveling to China or Europe or anywhere from there, and they've got cases of this virus. So there is no place to go. I remember my musician friends. Well, at least they could go to Houston and or New York or Chicago or Europe and they were embraced with, open arms and come, stay with us, play. There's no place for them to go right now. So there's that different element on this. So clearly we're in a state of extreme difficulty, I guess.
Yeah.
Is a way to put it. So let's talk about leadership. You gave a talk at Tulane maybe 10 days ago?
10 days exactly.
Now, this was just to put this in context, because not everybody's going to hear this today. This was before it became clear that the virus was very serious, before it became clear to the public and the government and the news media. Before that, a lot of people were saying, well, it's just a flu, what's the big deal? So that's the context. So tell us a little about what you said to this audience at Tulane. What was the occasion, by the way, for your talk?
Certainly. The occasion was an annual conference. It was a women's conference called Women Making Waves. I was an invited guest speaker on a panel, and the name of the panel was Rising to the Call to Lead in a Time of Disaster. And on Friday night, the night before the conference, I attended a speaker's reception, and I refused to shake hands. I refused. I said, no, I like to maintain distance, and I preferred to do the Thai way of saying hello, which is putting your hands together in a yoga class. And I was met with a combination of, okay, fine, whatever, or outright jeering looks. A handful of people said, you're absolutely right. That's the right thing to do. And so I actually got into a conversation with one of the guest speakers. Her name is Cindy Lerner, and she's from Florida, and she is a mayor of a small city in Florida. And she encouraged me to not only speak about the upcoming COVID. At that time, it's an upcoming disaster. We didn't really know it was here yet. And that I should speak about it using my podium, so to speak, as that opportunity. And she encouraged me, and I rose to her encouragement, and I did speak about it at the conference. So that was the occasion. That's why I spoke out. Gotcha.
And what did you talk about in your talk?
Well, I compared how I felt. I felt like I was in a deja vu. 15 years ago, I overzealously prepared, or thought I had, and 15 years ago, I zealously prepared, and that put me in an opportunity to watch a disaster unfold and watch a government botched response. And I said to the people 10 days ago, here I am reliving my experience of 15 years ago. I zealously overprepared. I'm going to, as an aside, I stocked up my house 5 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
With supplies, food, medicines, etc. I did that 5 weeks ago. So here I am. I zealously prepared. And here I am again, reliving the experience, watching the disaster unfold before my very eyes, and watching the government's botched response.
Yeah.
So that's what I spoke about, and I didn't, but I don't like to leave people feeling negative and down. So I said, it's probably here on our campus now, but there are things you can do. And I encouraged everybody to not touch others, and I said, I prefer the Thai Y. And I said, do not touch your face. And I threw out the statistic about how humans touch their face 90 times a day. And then I closed it with that. There is something you can do. Do it right now. So that was my talk. And I was not well received.
Really?
I was not well received. I was not. It was pretty much silence. And that's another thing that I relived. 15 years ago, when I went around saying this is the Army Corps of Engineers, I got that same silence.
Mm-hmm.
that's another deja vu that I'm going through. The pushback was mainly eye rolling. No one said out loud, "I'm being ridiculous." It was more of an eye rolling. But the overwhelming majority, the big bell curve, was mild. Like, okay, fine. She doesn't want to shake hands. Okay.
Gotcha. So if we start to break this down a little bit, step one, I guess, to being a leader is being willing to do the hard labor of thinking for yourself. So you were getting, and you were ahead of me, I have to say, on the flu thing. Originally I thought, well, gee, this is a heavily industrial city in China. It is perhaps the most polluted city on Earth. People wear masks every day just going to work, and I thought, well, maybe that's why they're having such a bad reaction to the flu, because there's a lot of lung disease there. So I thought maybe it was being exaggerated, but I did finally come around too. But I was thinking about it, though. I wasn't just passively. So maybe that's the first lesson. Don't passively assume that the authorities, whoever they may be, have it right. I think that must be ingrained in you. Just
apparently,
it's genetically in there, right? Well, I think we're both Irish, and I think if you know Irish history and you go back not too far, you realize there's no reason for us to believe the authorities about anything. So I guess step one is doing your homework, being willing to do your homework, being willing to not assuming that the authorities are telling you the truth. Either they don't know what's going on or they're deliberately misleading you. I mean, it's usually one or the other. And then being willing to look at something hard that's not really pleasant to contemplate. I mean, there's a lot of steps here that you went through to get to the point where you got to the podium, even to say what you had to say.
Yeah, I had to prepare. Obviously, I had to prepare my remarks and think through it carefully. I mean, a lot of people are listening. If I may interject, I also think it took. I had to not care what people thought of me.
Okay, there you go.
So I didn't care that I wasn't well received. And when I left that podium and when the conference ended, I went home and felt good about myself that I had spoken out and that I had done what I could when I had that opportunity. And I think that's a key word there. I had an opportunity right there, and I would have probably regretted it the rest of my life had I not spoken up and said something when I had the chance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you did your part. You had your vision based on your homework, based on your willing to look at the hard facts, based on your willing to entertain something unpleasant, and then you had the opportunity,
yes,
which you created for yourself through years of effort. I mean, not you know what I mean.
I meant the fact. Well, I see what you're saying, but I also happened to be speaking at a conference.
Yeah, but you were invited to speak at a conference because you've been a leader.
True.
Yeah,
it's true.
And so when that opportunity arose. Instead of doing the safe thing, in fact, I have something here in my office. Let me step up and get it. This is actually very applicable. Okay, and you may recognize this quote. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells one that it is right. And that's Martin Luther King. So between your story and now this good guidance from Martin Luther King, it's a blueprint for it's the beginning of a blueprint for how to be a leader. But it's only step one. So if we go back to levies.org, there was the willingness to do your homework. There was the insight that you can't always trust the veracity of the official version of events. There was the willingness to look at all the hard facts that became revealed to you. And then there was the willingness to say the unpopular but important thing. But now let's get to the really hard part, to persist and keep doing it for year after year after year after year after year for as long as it took. Let's talk about that part of leadership. And again, we're talking about, public service kind of things, but this applies to your community, helping your community. It applies to saving your business. It applies to being a leader in your industry. Don't think we're just talking about a narrow topic here. We're really talking about the topic. So 15 years. It's been 15. It'll be 15 years soon.
15 years.
And so 15 years ago, the rug, I mean, this is an understatement, the rug was pulled out from under New Orleans in a most devastating way. Everybody had to rebuild their life from scratch.
Meanwhile, wearing a cloak of shame.
Oh, forgot that, yeah.
They were being told this was their fault. They were being told by the federal government, by every politician that was elected at the time, that this was our fault.
I'd forgotten that part.
Quite the mantle to have to wear.
Yeah. And I notice even with this current situation, when the politicians get up on the podium, yesterday they were scolding people that were asking to be tested, and they said, well, don't ask for a test unless you're really sick, because we don't have that many to go. In other words, scolding, right? Well, why shouldn't people be able to get tested for an illness? And then they also felt it necessary to scold people for hoarding and for profiteering. Now, I know there's a few people out there profiteering. There aren't that many, frankly, and it needn't have taken up a half hour of Governor Cuomo's lecture to the public. So it's funny that they after they've kicked you in the teeth, they feel the need to scold about something. But yeah, New Orleans was treated in a most despicable way by the news media and national politicians. So let's talk, because a lot of people don't know. A lot of people listening to this don't know your story of what it took. First of all, what was your goal, and then what did it take to achieve that goal? And again, this applies to anything, not just this particular story that Sandy's telling, but to be a business person, and everyone on this call is a business person, you've got to be a leader. That's your job. We've already talked about some of the things that are required for real leadership, but now let's talk about the long haul.
Certainly.
It's one thing to stand on the stage and give one talk. That's just the beginning.
Okay. Certainly self-educate. It's almost impossible to find out everything there is to know about what it is you're trying to accomplish or what it is you're trying to do. And I certainly did that as much as I can. I don't even really enjoy reading books that much. I'm a slow reader, but it was necessary to educate myself if I was to lead this organization. So that was key and critical. And then once you've amassed that mountain of data, it's a comfortable thing to stand on. It gives you height. It gives you the ability to rise above the cornfield just enough that you know a little bit more than everybody else. And so that certainly gives me a lot of faith in my ability to do the work that needed to be done. Being thick-skinned is critical. I began to look at any sort of criticism as a compliment. Well, if someone taking the time to criticize me, I must be right. I would think so. And I never, ever use that as an excuse to feel sorry for myself. If I wanted to feel sorry for myself, it should be because I was tired or discouraged. Then it's a good time to feel sorry for myself. And I had a regimen to battle with that, and it was simply making sure I did some sort of exercise every single day. Even though I'm giving an example of what I did today. I figured out a way to play tennis and keep social distance. I play singles. I have my own can of balls. My opponent had her can of balls, and we never touched each other's balls, and we kept distance for 2 hours. We played this morning, and I'm very pink right now, but we made it work. Exercise is critically important, along with spending time with family and friends, because if you don't, you will self-implode.
Mm-hmm.
You will collapse under the weight and the pressure, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So those two are critical for me. So then I continued to, with the help of Mr. Ken McCarthy, I continued to try new ways to educate the American public about why New Orleans flooded. And there's so many different ways to do that. I mean, there's an endless pot of ways that you can educate. When my organization first started, YouTube was fairly new, and using tools and tricks and getting YouTube videos posted, I almost always managed to get them on the home page for most viewed and most liked, which was impossible today. But you have to deal with the pot of tricks you're given at the time. So new ways to educate, new ways to get the word out, and then probably this is the cover letter, but don't give up.
Right.
Don't give up.
And you ended up using a vast array of tools, but I think an important point is you didn't start out having a vast array of tools. You learned them one at a time.
That's correct.
Yeah.
One at a time.
Yep.
That's correct.
So you didn't need to know the A to Z of how but you just needed to know I'm at A. I know there's a Z out there somewhere, and I'm going to start walking and pick up the tools as I go forward. I think that's a very important thing. You didn't know how you were going to... By the way, I didn't really explain this adequately, but what Sandy accomplished was to compel the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and Fox and the BBC and the Christian Science Monitor and all these news outlets that were stubbornly misrepresenting what happened to New Orleans. And you don't know stubbornness until you've dealt with the news media when they're wrong. And she compelled them they didn't all fall at once. It took one after another. She compelled them to finally admit and report the truth, which is that New Orleans fell because of engineering failures related to the levees. It had nothing to do with God, it had nothing to do with Mother Nature, it had nothing to do with the weather.
Or the local people.
And we forget, I forget, local people were blamed. Oh, the local levee board, it's their fault. And there were even people that said, well, those New Orleanians, they're living under seawater and sea level, and they're always partying all the time, and who needs them anyway? Really nice stuff like that. And politicians, of course, just fell in line and said the same kind of foolish things. But to be able to change the narrative like that, it's unbelievable. It clearly wouldn't have happened without Sandy. It wouldn't. Maybe 100 years from now, some academic in Cambridge University might have been looking through some papers, and he might have written a treatise on it. It might have had a paragraph on the 150th page of the New York Times. And that would have been it. But because of Sandy's efforts, the official history is now what actually happened versus what the official baloney story was when the flood occurred. So this was a huge, huge accomplishment that took a tremendous amount of energy, and it was done one step at a time. Now, you didn't start out as a publicist person or a public affairs strategist, right?
Or an investigator.
Investigative reporter, a water engineer. You had no background to do any of this, and this is how kind of we all are when we start our businesses. We all underestimate how many things we actually need to know to make a business run, and we have to suddenly become expert in all kinds of things. And so Sandy's a great example of how that works in practice.
And on that, if I may, it's also delegation and relegation when I'm in a department that I don't know what to do. I'm here in my office now, and I almost was in tears. This is in 2007 because the civil engineering details was confusing to me, and I felt overwhelmed. And I actually was almost in tears, and I was thinking to myself, I can't do this. And a civil engineer that had been working with me for at least a year by then said, "Don't worry, Sandy, I'll help you." And it was as simple as that. Oh. So, but I needed to accept his help.
Mm-hmm.
I also accepted the help of a media strategist like Ken McCarthy. I accepted the help of an attorney who offered some help pro bono. His name is Mark Serpinon. I accepted the help of a publicist who offered some pro bono work. And I not only did I accept their help, I used their help. Which is really all the thanks they really want most of the time. And then over time, I would learn on my own how to do these things. On my own, I learned how to write a press release. On my own, I learned how to do a video, not film it, of course, but how to put together, strategize a video. But I think I do believe it is critical to know when you need to take what you think and throw it out the window and accept the advice of others on a topic on which you are not. You don't know jack.
Very good, very good. Yeah, it's sometimes we forget that for a problem that we might have that seems insurmountable, just beyond complexity, is just a day in the park for somebody who's no, they just like, oh, I do that every day. Let me just do it for you, you know.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
But the other thing, and this is really an important part, as you know, I've been advising Sandy. And I've never, ever, ever felt that any advice I gave was wasted. Like my breath, I never, you know, sometimes I have clients and I feel like, oh my God, you know, this is terrible. I'm just wasting my breath. I had the opposite experience with Sandy. I would give Sandy a nickel and she'd come back with $1 worth of return on my advice, and consistently. So know that there are people that know out there somewhere. Reach out to them. And then, for goodness sake, you take advantage. You know, and you're right. That's, you know, in this instance, all I wanted to see was the good thing done, and I feel 100 times paid back because the good thing was done. Now maybe, you know, in a business setting, some people might you would pay a fee to somebody, but still, even a fee charging person likes to see, who knows what he's talking about, likes to see his clients use the material and run with it, and you'll get more from your advisors if you do that. You'll get far more. If you're the kind of, I have someone I'm helping right now, every response I get back from her is immediately negative, you know, and I'm persisting because her cause is so important. I'm just letting the water roll off my back, and I'm just pushing her forward and keeping her moving forward. But it's a drag, you know? And so the opposite of that is every response is respectful and interested and enthusiastic. And that just makes me want to pull more from my background. And so when you're working with experts, as Sandy has just said, be that way, and you'll get.
And they'll come back and give you more advice.
Yeah.
Come back and help you more.
Yeah.
And they'll be there with you for the long haul, because if you're an expert, I mean, I'm using Ken McCarthy as an example, but Ken McCarthy's time is valuable, and if he's going to give you even a minute of his time, I need to cherish that minute. And if an expert ever gets the feeling that their time is being wasted, they will never talk to you again.
It's kind of true, and even in fact somebody who was paying me a fee, you know, I'm not working with them anymore because I don't want to waste my time. Life's too short. So we're coming up with a good checklist of things that people need to keep in mind when they're faced with difficulties or catastrophes. So where do we go from here? Maybe just a quick review. You can't be, I guess we could say you can't be passive. I mean, that's probably the fundamental lesson here. You can't just wait for somebody else to show up and take care of things.
Agreed.
You've got to do homework. And I didn't realize that you didn't like reading, and so that must.
Really, no.
Yeah. So yeah, I actually used to teach reading and study skills, and so I've experienced that with people, very bright people, very interesting and interested people. Just some of them just don't like the act of reading. It's not their thing. So that must have been particularly hard for you because there was a lot of reading you had to do, to say the least.
That is very, very true. But I had to make myself do it. It was just critical that I understand all the detail. So yes, I made myself read. So the geek factor is critical, I believe, in a leader. You've got to be a bit of a geek. You have to read.
Yep. And then you have to have the guts when the information you're getting is not pretty. Mm-hmm. You have to stick with it. And I find so many people, they can't contemplate anything other than a Disney version of reality. Mm-hmm. And I think, we have to live in reality. Sometimes reality is fantastic. There's amazing things out there. They're wonderful beyond belief. And there's some other stuff out there that's kind of dark and shocking and, kind of unnerving. You just have to ride with it and stick with it. And then the point of when you've come to your conclusion, I'm just going back to Martin Luther King, it may not be safe to take the direction you're taking. It may not be politic. And folks, you got to understand, to go against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in New Orleans, not a good idea for political reasons. So many people's bread is buttered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in New Orleans to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, I was worried for Sandy's safety, actually. I don't know how contractors are in New Orleans. I know how they are in the greater 5 boroughs, and you just don't push those guys too far.
I do believe they didn't really think that my organization would succeed like we did. Mm-hmm. As unhappy as they were, and I detailed it in my book, I was harassed online. I was harassed in all kinds of ways, and I discussed that in my book. I really don't believe they thought Levy.org would be, the organization that I created, would be as successful as it was. Mm-hmm. I think if they had, the pushback would have been a lot worse when it happened at the time.
Yeah, I bet if they could do it over, they would like a do-over. Boy, so many things to talk about. Let's talk about some of the things that you've put in place permanently, because everybody has a different mission. Some people it's to build a business. Some people it's to right a wrong. Some people it's to educate the public. So you got to adapt this to your purposes. But one of your purposes was to make sure that the truth of this wasn't forgotten, because it's one thing to get a story in the New York Times, and one day it comes out and says, oh, you know what? It was the levees. We got it wrong. Sorry. Well, that fades away within a week. So you've done some really interesting things in pursuit of your mission to make sure that this information is not lost to future generations. Let's just talk about that. Very creative stuff.
Certainly. Well, one of the first things that we did was we installed plaques at major breach sites that were vetted by the Louisiana Historic Office of Preservation. That's a very time-honored, laudable thing. This has been around. This program's been around for 200 years or more. So these plaques are very revered around town. So when I started putting plaques in the ground, the state office actually changed their rules for having it done, because I think the Army Corps of Engineers might have made a phone call. But before that law change, I managed to get 3 of these into the ground at 3 of the major breach sites in New Orleans. So that's one of the first things we did. And then we got a little bit more creative, as you say, as times went on. The second thing that we did is I got a tip from a supporter who told me that the lot in front of one of the major breach sites was actually up for lease. And she urged me perhaps you could lease the land and perhaps put some signage up on it. Well, we took her suggestion and ramped it up about 100 times better, and we actually built a full outdoor exhibit. The length, it's about 100 feet long, with 6 museum-sized panels, and it's a covered walkway, and we have a beautiful rain garden. We raised the money to build that, and so that is now it's unleased land from the city, but one day I expect to see that become permanent. And probably the most interesting thing we've done, which I'm sure there's nothing like it, I know there's nothing like this in the country, is we took one of the last remaining damaged homes that had been damaged by flooding that was within just a stone's throw of a breach site, and we bought the house and we stabilized it, and then we converted one of the rooms into what the average New Orleanian had to look at when they got back from their flood-imposed exile. The room it wasn't real, of course, it wasn't truly flooded, but we're done with scenic techniques and scenic design art, and these artists took the room and made it look like it had been flooded, and that's there permanently because we own the house and we own everything about it, and that's there permanently, and it's there every day, dawn to dusk, for anyone who wants to learn about the flood disaster.
Great. And then you also have the annual bicycle ride.
Yes, we do. I lead. It's my one bike ride a year. I play tennis. I don't really like bike riding, but I do this once a year because it's important. And that's actually going to be, well, that would have been coming up next month. We'll have to tell if that bike ride is going to come to pass.
Yeah.
The city may allow something like that.
So the mission was to, first of all, to get to the truth, mm-hmm. and which took a lot of research, to say the least. Then the second mission was to educate the public. And part of that had to do with getting the news media to do its job, which has got to be the hardest job on earth. But Sandy prevailed there. And then the third piece is a permanent record, a permanent visible record, so that we don't forget. You know, we have war memorials. Why do we have that? Because we don't want to forget the sacrifice of people that gave up their lives in a various war. Well, we don't want to forget the tragic circumstances that led to so many people losing their lives in New Orleans, and so much havoc and so much property damage and so many lives disrupted. Now you have a book that's going to be coming out fairly soon. Now we're in March. Do you have your countdown to launch yet? It's pretty. Let's see. We just passed. It's the 11th. It's going to come out, right, on August.
That's August 11th. So, we just passed the countdown, April, May, June, July, August. In 5 months, my book will be available in paperback, also as an audio book. It has been #1 new release 6 times, been badged with, that's an Amazon.com term, and it's been #1 new release for well over a week now. So pre-orders must be doing well.
Okay, and the name of the book is?
The Words Whispered in Water, Why the Levee Broke in Hurricane Katrina.
Gotcha. Words Whispered in Water by Sandy Rosenthal. We've covered a whole lot, and I just want to bring everybody back to this point of comparison. It's a very difficult time right now. If somebody owns a business that involves constant contact with the public, for lack of a better phrase, they're screwed right now. I mean, this is just terrible. Restaurants, if you had a restaurant, I don't know how it is in New Orleans, but they're closed in New York. Gyms are closed. All kinds of businesses where people used to congregate, clubs, bars, concert venues. And this is going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to set a lot of people very far back. And just remember, or keep as a point of comparison, you still have your home. You know, if you had a home last month, you still have one. The stores still have stuff in them, I think. I went out shopping today. There was food. We have power. We have water.
We have internet.
We have internet. None of these things existed for the people in New Orleans for months and months and months. Even in New York City, which had a nothing compared to the levee failures, Hurricane Sandy. I was down there 2 months afterwards. There were still people without power in the middle of the winter. So we have our basic infrastructure in place. And I have to add this point, because this is not true for many people in the world. Nobody's bombing us.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people going to sleep tonight or wondering if they're going to make it to the next day because they're in the middle of an active war zone. So we have a bad situation, but we have a lot of foundational stuff that is pretty significant. So I'm going to guess that Sandy would agree with me that self-pity, maybe give yourself 15 minutes a day.
Right.
Have a really good rant and rave and stomp your feet at the injustice of it all, and then drop it.
Right.
And I think the other thing that's so important to
do some jumping jacks.
Jumping jacks, okay.
But that's another thing. It's difficult to exercise. I mean, at a time like this, I had to get very creative to figure out a way to get some exercise. I figured out a way to play my tennis, and the other thing that I do is yoga, and I'm doing yoga in my home.
Okay.
Which still can be done in the homes, I would highly encourage everybody to keep, if they have an exercise regimen, don't give that up. Figure out a way to get that exercise as well, because exercise has a way of taking your problems and making them smaller.
Absolutely. Gives you perspective, puts things in perspective.
For 100 reasons, it makes them smaller.
And then we see in Italy, you've probably seen the videos, I hope you have, if not, that we're seeing of people are singing.
Yes.
In the apartment complexes. That's a very Italian thing to do. But there are positive things that you can do, and it's important to seek them out, be creative about them, and exercise them, use them. And Sandy made that such an important point. You've got to be with people, you've got to exercise. You've got to seek out the positive aggressively and consistently. And then I think something else really important is, you're probably going to have to do a whole lot of learning to rebuild. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's not going to be pleasant. There may be a lot of technical material that you otherwise would not want to have anything to do with, that maybe you're now going to have to put your head into, and just soldier through it and just do it. You may not like to read. Well, you're going to have to read a lot. You may not like to deal with government bureaucrats. Well, you may have to deal with a lot of them. Just be prepared to do that.
And not like public speaking. Fortunately, that's one of the few things I didn't mind.
Okay.
Most people like it. I mean, most people don't like it.
Yeah.
I actually don't mind that. I for whatever reason, every time I had to do public speaking or had to do a television interview or a live radio interview, I would just remind myself of the people who were so much less fortunate than myself, and that got me through it.
And I think that's a big part of leadership too. Being realistic. Now some people may be in such difficulty that they really have to just focus on their own situation. They don't, they have to say they have a restaurant, the restaurant's closed, they have 45 employees that, they've got a lot to deal with. But be realistic about your situation. Maybe you're inconvenienced, maybe you're massively inconvenienced, but you have breathing room to be of help. Because it's very easy, Sandy, you probably could have made a good case that, oh my God, my city's destroyed, I can't go on, She's smiling right. If I wish you had the video. She's smiling right now. But you made the decision. My city's destroyed. All the things that I love about New Orleans have been knocked down. I'm going to use the solid ground I'm standing on to fight for my community. And I believe that decision you made made all the difference in the world. Right?
Yes, it did. It was, and in hindsight, it was very audacious. And I back at myself, go, what was I thinking? But it was a bold thing to do. There's nothing unbold about it, no question.
And I hate to be like give pablum kind of advice, especially when people are facing difficulty. But I've been through some not insignificant difficulties myself, and if you can just keep your head together and keep putting one step in front of the other, it does eventually get better. And you will feel so great for having not only survived the difficulty, but prevailed. It's such a great feeling. And I've seen people that didn't do that, and it's not a good feeling to give up and throw in your hand. And again, there are going to be times when it seems too dark and it seems impossible. You're human, you're going to feel that, but don't indulge it too much, right? I mean, I'm sure, Sandy, there must have been times when you just felt this is impossible.
There was one period that I cried for 2 weeks because I thought I had failed at something critically important that I actually is the climax of my book that I hope everybody buys. Turned up, I didn't know it. I'd already succeeded. I didn't know it yet.
Okay.
I didn't know it. So, and it turned out my 99-year-old grandmother was right. She once said to me, you may have already won, you just don't know it yet. And that's a thought that I like to keep with me. Then it actually came true. Unfortunately, my grandmother had passed away by the time that actually happened to me. But I think we should all remember. You might have already have won, you just don't know it yet.
Wow. That's the kind of advice you can only get from your grandmother, who's seen a lot. And so that's what Sandy and I are trying to do. Well, you are a grandmother now, actually.
Yes, I am. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter.
Okay, so you can give grandmotherly advice at this point. And I guess that's what we're trying to do on this call. There are people that are listening to this that are younger, maybe significantly younger, therefore have less life experience. It just goes to say if you're younger, you're going to have less life experience than somebody older. Sandy and I have had the dubious pleasure of having dealt with very serious things and gotten through the other side. So there may be people listening to this that have never see, to me this and I'm sure to you too, this is terrible, but this isn't the worst you've seen. Right? And it's certainly not the worst I've seen. So we have that perspective too. This will pass. It will run its course. Life will get back to normal. And you have the benefit of you don't have to physically rebuild your city from scratch in order for life to get back to normal. I mean, everything that's here now will still be around. And it's just a matter of, putting everything back to work. So this is what this call was about, to encourage you and inspire you and give you some perspective. And I couldn't think of a better person to do this call with than Sandy. I can't say you're my favorite client because then some of my other favorite clients would be annoyed at me. But I will say top 3. So,
wow!
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no question. And if I were sure they weren't listening, I might say best. And because just pleasure to work with, always ready to take a good idea, always ready to execute, always appreciative. It's fun to work with somebody like that. So maybe that's the last piece of advice here. When you're working with an advisor, be that kind of person. And you pointed that out in the call. It really, really makes a difference. So Sandy Rosenthal, thank you so much. What's that?
To treat people like they are valuable.
And you're an expert at that. And it's sincere, too, so it makes it easier for you. So the book is Words Whispered
in Water.
Words Whispered in Water. And people can actually pre-order it.
Absolutely. It's on Amazon.com and also Barnes & Noble.
And when the book comes out in August, you'll get the whole story, and you're going to be amazed. Sandy is an excellent archivist and note keeper. It's almost scary. I'm glad I behaved myself in these last 15 years or 13 years, because she's kept note of everything I've ever said and done, much to my shock. And so I just imagine that magnified over all the contacts you've had over the years. So this must be an incredibly well documented story.
It is data dense, but I have about 10 people have reviewed the book, and it's data dense, but it's also very readable. It's a very it's a bit of a page turner, even though it's got a lot chock full of data.
Well, I believe it. To me, this is one of the great American stories of our time. That the catastrophe in New Orleans was unprecedented in American history. Literally, there's never been a piece of this country that has been so devastated as what happened in New Orleans. And
Right.
For New Orleans, the people of New Orleans, to stand up with you as the leader and say, wait a minute, what really happened here? And to dig through all the fabrications and all the public relations and all the flim-flammery and get to the truth, and then to stick with that truth and not give up until it was finally, well, now it's permanent. It's a permanent record, and you just can go to New Orleans and it's everywhere. To me, it's one of the great stories of our time in America, and I think it will inspire everybody that gets it. So, Sandy, thank you so much. So great to see you.
Good to see you too, and I have to say thank you, Ken, for your help the past almost the whole 15 years. We met at the very beginning, not quite at the beginning, but I just have to make sure that your listeners understand that much of the success my organization achieved were due directly to the involvement and the advice and the encouragement and the support of Ken McCarthy.
Well, thanks for saying so. All right.
Okay.
Well, we'll catch you around. Thanks for being with us. Bye-bye.
Okay.